In the early hours of February 3, 2026, a classified intelligence file began moving through restricted U.S. defense channels, triggering urgent alerts at multiple command levels. Senior officers who reviewed the material reportedly recognized its seriousness immediately. The document, written in Farsi and carrying Revolutionary Guard markings, described what appeared to be a detailed operational strike concept, not a theory paper, but a structured combat scenario. Its central claim outlined a coordinated missile saturation attack aimed at a U.S. carrier strike group. Within hours, emergency briefings were scheduled across commands as analysts worked to verify authenticity, origin, and intent behind the material. According to intelligence summaries, the file stretched across dozens of pages and described a scenario labeled as a retaliatory or preemptive strike framework. Rather than a limited response, it modeled a massive, simultaneous launch designed to overwhelm layered naval defenses through volume and timing. Defense officials reviewing the material reportedly treated it as credible enough to trigger rapid assessment protocols. Multiple agencies began cross-checking technical references inside the document against satellite imagery, prior intercepts, and known missile inventories. The concern was not only the weapons described, but the coordination methods outlined, which suggested synchronized launches across dispersed geographic zones rather than a single firing point. Reports indicated the document did not come through routine surveillance collection. Instead, it was allegedly passed through a sensitive human intelligence channel linked to missile planning units. The source, identity undisclosed, was believed to have had access to operational materials at a secured aerospace facility. Images of the plan were reportedly captured covertly and transmitted through encrypted means before the source went silent. Intelligence agencies have not publicly confirmed the individual's fate. Authentication teams focused instead on technical markers, formatting signatures, terminology patterns, and procedural language, many of which reportedly matched previously verified internal military planning documents. Analysts noted that the planning framework described a doctrine of striking first if conflict appeared unavoidable. The logic presented was based on neutralizing the most powerful regional platform before it could be fully employed. In this scenario, the primary target would be a carrier strike group, considered one of the most concentrated symbols of U.S. power projection. The document suggested that disabling such an asset could shift regional momentum, disrupt air operations, and create political shock. Whether this represented actual intent or theoretical deterrence modeling remains debated inside intelligence circles, but reviewers agreed the operational detail level was unusually high. What drew the most attention was the proposed launch scale. The scenario described more than 200 ballistic missiles fired within an extremely tight time window, reportedly under 2 minutes. The concept relied on saturation, forcing defensive systems to face more incoming threats than available interceptors and engagement cycles could handle. Launch points were spread across numerous hardened and mobile sites, including underground facilities and transporter launchers positioned in mountainous terrain. This dispersion would complicate preemptive targeting and reduce the chance that a single strike could stop the attack before execution. The strike model referenced a mixed missile inventory rather than a single system. Different missile classes were assigned different roles, some intended to saturate radar and interceptor capacity, others aimed at precision hits on escort vessels, and a final tier reserved for high-speed maneuvering weapons intended to penetrate degraded defenses. Analysts noted this layered approach mirrored modern anti-access doctrine. First overload sensors and interceptors, then exploit defensive gaps. The sequencing suggested planners expected partial interception and built redundancy into the attack design rather than assuming perfect penetration on the first wave. Defensive math became central to the Pentagon's internal discussions. Naval missile defense ships carry finite interceptor counts and must balance multiple mission types: air defense, anti-ship, anti-submarine, and strike roles. Even under optimized loadouts, interceptor inventories are not unlimited. Modeling teams reportedly ran rapid simulations, estimating engagement success rates under heavy saturation. Results varied widely depending on positioning, readiness, and system performance, but one conclusion repeated: extremely high-volume attacks compress decision time and strain even advanced layered defenses. Solid-fuel missile systems described in the document raised additional concern because they reduce preparation time and are harder to detect before launch. Mobile launchers operating from concealed terrain could shorten warning windows significantly. If missiles were pre-positioned and maintained at readiness, detection might occur only minutes before launch. That compressed timeline would limit repositioning options for naval assets operating within range. Intelligence reviewers emphasized that readiness indicators, fueling activity, launcher dispersal, communication spikes would become critical early warning signals under such a scenario. The plan also reportedly included escort-first targeting logic. Rather than focusing solely on the carrier, the model prioritized disabling defensive ships that provide radar coverage and interceptor capability. Removing or degrading those escorts would expose the central vessel to follow-on strikes. Analysts described this as tactically consistent with modern naval warfare theory: defeat the shield before striking the core. Precision-guided systems were assigned to these roles in the scenario, indicating planners expected to attempt ship-specific targeting rather than broad-area bombardment. Timing sequences outlined in the material suggested a countdown structure with confirmation checkpoints, reconnaissance verification, system readiness reports, authorization layers, and synchronized launch windows. Intelligence professionals noted that whether or not the scenario would ever be executed, the planning maturity itself carried strategic meaning. It demonstrated structured thinking about saturation warfare against naval assets. By the morning of February 3rd, senior leadership briefings were underway, focusing not only on capability, but intent, detectability, and how force posture might need adjustment if such a strike model moved from paper to preparation. A key section of the reported plan addressed what planners assumed would happen the moment launches were detected. Missile warning satellites would spot booster plumes within seconds, followed by radar tracking across regional defense networks. Alerts would move instantly through command centers, from forward naval headquarters to continental command structures. The document's authors appeared to assume retaliation was guaranteed and rapid. As a result, the scenario listed facilities considered expendable in the opening exchange. Surface bases, radar nodes, and command posts expected to be struck. The trade-off described was stark: absorb immediate losses in exchange for crippling a high-value naval asset. When senior U.S. leadership was briefed, the first concern reportedly centered on feasibility rather than motive. Could such a coordinated launch actually be carried out at that scale and speed? Military advisors reportedly answered with caution. Intercept systems are highly capable, but not designed for unlimited simultaneous engagements. Performance depends on geometry, readiness, interceptor mix, and timing. In simulations, many incoming threats could be defeated, but rarely all. The phrase repeated in several brief summaries was simple: saturation changes the equation. Even strong defenses can be stressed if engagement queues exceed firing and reload cycles. Emergency policy meetings focused on three central questions: whether the scenario represented real intent or theoretical deterrence planning, how early preparations could be detected, and what posture changes would reduce vulnerability. Intelligence agencies were divided on intent assessment. Some analysts argued that detailed operational modeling suggests serious consideration. Others countered that militaries routinely build extreme contingency plans they never expect to execute. The leak itself added uncertainty. If the exposure was accidental, it compromised planning. If intentional, it might have been meant as a deterrent signal, demonstrating capability without firing a single missile. Detection timelines produced uncomfortable conclusions. Missile infrastructure was dispersed across wide territory, with hardened sites and mobile launchers complicating tracking. Continuous satellite coverage is powerful, but not absolute. Analysts warned that if systems were pre-fueled or solid fuel-based, preparation signatures could be subtle. That meant warning time might shrink from days to hours, possibly minutes. Naval forces operating in confined waters would have limited maneuver options under such compressed notice. This realization pushed surveillance prioritization higher, with expanded tasking for overhead imagery, signals monitoring, and movement pattern analysis around known missile regions. Debate emerged over preventive options. One camp favored preemptive strikes against launch infrastructure if indicators showed imminent preparation. Another warned that such action could trigger exactly the scenario planners feared, turning a contingency into reality. A third group emphasized indirect measures: posture adjustments, interceptor loadout changes, and diplomatic signaling designed to raise the perceived cost of execution. The risk of misinterpretation dominated discussion. If either side misread defensive moves as offensive preparation, escalation could accelerate unintentionally. Strategic messaging therefore became as important as physical defense changes. Immediate operational steps were reportedly approved. Carrier groups in range zones increased defensive readiness levels. Escort ships adjusted interceptor ratios in vertical launch cells, allocating more capacity to ballistic missile defense roles. Continuous air patrol coverage was expanded, and at least one ship in each formation maintained dedicated missile defense orientation at all times. Surveillance tasking against missile infrastructure rose sharply in priority queues. Quiet diplomatic messages were also transmitted through intermediaries, signaling awareness of the reported strike concept and warning that execution would trigger overwhelming response. Aboard deployed naval formations, commanders briefed crews with measured language. The emphasis was readiness, not alarm. Sailors were reminded that carriers are always high-value targets, and that layered defense exists precisely for complex threats. Still, officials acknowledged a psychological difference between general risk and a specifically described attack model. Training cycles intensified. Damage control drills, rapid response launches, and missile defense exercises increased in frequency. Leadership messaging focused on professionalism and preparation, reinforcing that discipline and coordination, not fear, are decisive under pressure. Escort ships in a strike group bring sophisticated radar and interceptor systems capable of tracking and engaging many targets at once. However, every system has throughput limits: radar tracking capacity, fire control channels, interceptor inventory, and engagement timing. Modeling teams ran layered defense scenarios under heavy load. Results showed strong performance against moderate salvos, but declining certainty as volume increased. Even high intercept percentages can leave leakage when totals are large. Analysts stressed that defense is probabilistic, not absolute, a reality well understood in modern missile warfare planning. Damage projections in the reported scenario did not assume total destruction of a carrier, but focused on mission kill outcomes, rendering flight operations impossible through deck damage, fires, or system disruption. Modern carriers are heavily compartmentalized and resilient, yet repeated high-energy impacts could halt operations for extended periods. That distinction matters strategically. A ship does not need to sink to be removed from the fight. Temporary neutralization during a crisis could achieve major operational effects even without catastrophic loss. Analysts also noted that recent regional conflicts had demonstrated how layered defenses can succeed overall, while still allowing limited penetration, especially when attackers combine volume with advanced maneuvering weapons. Lessons observed globally showed that saturation mixed with high-speed systems complicates interception. The reported strike model appeared to incorporate those lessons, sequencing volume first, advanced systems later. Whether theoretical or operational, reviewers agreed the concept reflected contemporary missile warfare thinking rather than outdated doctrine. In the days following the reported leak, surveillance reportedly detected increased activity around several known missile-related locations. Thermal signatures, vehicle movement, and equipment repositioning drew analyst attention, though interpretations differed. Some experts argued the patterns matched routine operational cycling. Others believed the timing was too coincidental to ignore. Intelligence assessments warned against confirmation bias, the tendency to see threat indicators more clearly after receiving alarming information. Still, monitoring intensity increased. Watch centers shifted to shorter reporting intervals, and pattern-of-life baselines were revalidated to distinguish ordinary logistics from possible launch preparation behavior. Back-channel diplomatic communication soon followed through neutral intermediaries. Messages exchanged were carefully worded, neither confirming nor denying specific operational details. One side emphasized defensive doctrine and deterrence principles. The other stressed that any large-scale missile strike would be treated as an act of war. Both signaled that escalation was not desired, but readiness was firm. This type of calibrated messaging is common in high-risk standoffs. Acknowledge capability, deny intent, preserve deterrence. The objective is stability through clarity, ensuring neither side misreads silence as weakness or preparation as imminent attack. Over the following weeks, visible tensions gradually eased. Observed activity levels at monitored facilities returned closer to historical norms. Naval patrol patterns normalized while maintaining elevated alert procedures. Intelligence tasking remained heavier than before the incident, but crisis footing softened. Defense planners, however, did not revert to previous assumptions. Internal models were updated to include large-scale saturation strike scenarios as standard planning cases rather than edge hypotheticals. Once a capability is judged plausible, it becomes a permanent variable in force protection calculations regardless of immediate intent signals. For military planners, the most lasting effect was analytical, not emotional. Assumptions about carrier operating risk inside constrained waters were revisited. Greater emphasis was placed on distance, maneuver space, and distributed support formations. Interceptor allocation strategies were revised, and contingency withdrawal routes were rehearsed more frequently. None of this indicated retreat, rather, adaptation. High-value assets remain central to naval doctrine, but risk models evolve as adversary capabilities grow. Strategic posture is never static. It adjusts in response to credible threat mathematics. The exposure carried mixed consequences for the side that authored the alleged plan. Demonstrating capability can strengthen deterrence by convincing adversaries that attack would be costly. At the same time, revealing operational structure allows opponents to design counters. Once timing logic, sequencing concepts, and targeting priorities become known, defenders can adapt. Military planning thrives on uncertainty. Exposure reduces that advantage. Analysts noted that any future real-world plan would likely differ in structure to avoid predictability, incorporating deception, decoys, or altered sequencing. Psychological impact spread across both forces. Naval crews understood more concretely how saturation warfare might look in practice, reinforcing the seriousness of missile defense training. Missile operators on the other side likely recognized their activities were under intensified observation. Continuous surveillance creates pressure. Every movement scrutinized, every exercise interpreted. That pressure can deter rash action, but it can also increase misinterpretation risk. Crisis stability depends not only on weapons and defenses, but on human judgment under uncertainty. Strategic analysts emphasized a broader lesson. Vulnerability does not equal obsolescence. Major platforms remain powerful, but no longer operate beyond reach. Precision missiles, faster sensors, and coordinated launch doctrine have changed exposure levels for concentrated assets worldwide. This trend is not unique to one region. It appears in multiple theaters. As a result, modern doctrine blends protection, dispersion, deception, and retaliation into layered deterrence models. The goal is not perfect defense, which is unattainable, but unacceptable cost for the attacker. Budgetary and technology responses reportedly followed. Missile defense interceptors, radar upgrades, and emerging directed energy concepts received increased attention in funding discussions. However, hardware solutions take years to deploy. Production timelines, shipyard schedules, and testing cycles move slower than threat evolution. That gap between present risk and future capability is a recurring defense challenge. Near-term mitigation therefore relies on tactics and posture, while long-term mitigation depends on technology and procurement. Regional partners reacted with caution, seeking assurance that great power confrontation would not spill onto their territory. Quiet coordination expanded around shared early warning and defensive cooperation. Exercises increased, but so did diplomatic engagement. Deterrence is strongest when alliances are synchronized, not only militarily, but communicatively. Unified signaling reduces the chance that an adversary believes pressure can split partners apart. Stability is often built through these less visible coordination layers rather than public statements. Whether the reported strike blueprint was ever intended for execution remains unknown. What is clear is its analytical impact. It forced planners to confront a reality long understood but rarely illustrated so starkly. In modern missile warfare, even the most capable assets can be threatened through volume and coordination. That realization encourages restraint as much as readiness. When both sides recognize the scale of potential loss, deterrence can hold. The plan, real or theoretical, ultimately reinforced a core principle of strategy. Preventing war is often about proving you could fight one.